Okay, so for our random smarter balance review, we're going to look at sine, cosine, and tangent. Yep. So you've done these before. We're going to review them. Hopefully it won't take too long. So we use sine, cosine, and tangent to find missing sides of triangles. And we use it when we only know one side. So on our warm-up, I need two sides, right?
What? We need two sides?
No. On Pythagorean theorem, you need two. But on
Ow!
sine, cosine, tangent, all I need is one. And people smarter than me have figured out ratios in triangles. So if you have, to find the sine of an angle,
no, never mind.
that is the same thing as opposite over hypotenuse, which you actually read. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. And I can set up ratios with the sides. The opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse are always sides. So when I look at a triangle, if I'm going to start at angle A here, hypotenuse is always the longest side. Opposite and adjacent, we look at based on the angle I'm starting. So hypotenuse is always the longest. You okay there, Melissa? Making funny ears or something?
No.
Anyway, so if I have to find my opposite side, so if I'm starting at angle A, opposite side is all the way on the opposite side of the triangle. So that's my opposite. And then adjacent is the only one left over, it's right next to the angle. So I have a hypotenuse, an opposite, and an adjacent. And I remember hypotenuse is the longest, adjacent is all the way on the opposite, or excuse me, opposite is on the opposite side of the triangle, and adjacent is right next to it. And so we're going to use these ratios over here, and the easy way to remember it, anybody remember that acronym?
I mean, I've been saying it all period.
Once.
So. Huh?
Yep.
Oh my god.
SOHCAHTOA. So what this means is that the sine is going to equal the opposite divided by the hypotenuse.
Isn't one of them over, or is it always divided?
It's well, same thing.
What is the heck
Over
is that?
What? It's sine equals opposite divided by hypotenuse.
Oh.
A cosine equals adjacent divided by hypotenuse. And tangent is going to equal
Stupid.
opposite divided by
It's just
adjacent.
Okay, and how do you know which one is sine, cosine, or tangent?
Well, we'll look. We'll look at that.
Sorry.
Say.
No, you're gonna have to figure it out, but there's a way
Oh
to
wait,
do that.
it wants you to do all three of them, so you just
Yeah.
do. Okay, I got you.
Over.
Okay.
Wait.
So I'll wait for everybody to get this down.
Okay, cool. What the heck is that? What? It's just.
And then we'll keep going.
Over. Can you like move your shadow out of the picture?
I could, but will I? That is the question.
You just did, so.
Yeah. So I will.
Yeah.
That's good.
Here. It is allergies. It sucks too.
You got this, Alyssa? You okay there, Maya? Looks like your team's switching out a little. You must be done. All right. So we're going to write the three trig functions for angle t. So sine, cosine, and tangent are your trig functions. So from angle t, I'm going to label my sides before I do anything. So hypotenuse is my longest. Which one of these is my longest side, Alyssa?
17.
Oh wait. I'm not-
Yeah.
17. Okay.
You
Or Maya, which one's the opposite?
8.
Yep. So we got to go all the way to the opposite over here. And adjacent's the only one that's left. So I'm going to write down my acronym again too. So,
What are you doing? Lighting your lips. Jeez, I hope not.
okay, so if I'm going to do sine of angle t, that is going to equal the opposite over hypotenuse. So my opposite is 8
8?
over my hypotenuse, which is 17.
Sounds like you said 8.
Nope. 8. Okay. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so cosine of t is going to be the adjacent, which is 15, over hypotenuse, which is 17. And the last one, tangent, is going to equal opposite over adjacent. So my opposite is 8 over my adjacent, which is 15. Okay. So we're going to use these 3 trig functions to actually go through and find some missing sides. After let me get this in mind there. Alright, so we're going to find x and y in this triangle. So before I do anything else, what I'm going to do is I'm going to label everything. So my longest is my hypotenuse, my opposite is over here on the opposite side, and my adjacent's right here.
It's pretty much always in the same spot, right? Oh, wait, no, it depends on where
Yeah,
the
it depends on where the
number
angle
is.
is. Yeah.
I got you.
So like on this one, it's going to be different. So we'll get to that. Okay, let me check something real quick. Alright, so on this one, we have to find x and y. So let's just solve for x first. Let me write my acronym.
Don't go home.
Okay. So let's start by solving for x. So what I want to do, I need to pick which one of these 3 I'm going to use. So I can use any one, but I need to make sure I use the, like, it doesn't matter which one of these 3 I use, as long as I use what
So
fits. No, it
then
doesn't. Never mind.
sign
Okay.
it.
I just have to figure out which one to use. So I'm going to find
Sign.
x, right? X is my adjacent, right? So if x is adjacent, which side has an actual number on it already?
40.
The
Oh, wait, we're on the
which
wrong one.
side, yeah.
The
Hypotenuse, right? It's got a 5 here. So I want to find my adjacent, and I have my hypotenuse. Which one of these 3 things, sine, cosine, or tangent, uses adjacent and hypotenuse?
Hello, the
Cosine.
Cosine.
So
Adjacent, hypotenuse.
cosine.
So I'm going to set up cosine. And when I do it, I go cosine of 50. It's going to equal my adjacent, which is x,
Can't we
over
put that
my
in decimals?
hypotenuse, which is 5. And we can go through and solve this in decimals. So cosine of 50, I can just plug straight into decimals.
Cosine.
0.96.
Actually, you might.
Do you not do a
Do we
space
just type
for
into
it?
No, make sure you're in degrees.
Do you do a space or no
Come
space?
on,
No,
Bogey.
you can type in cos. No, it's not. Okay, so cosine, you can
Wait,
either
how
type
do you
in
know if you're in
COS or
degrees?
you can go to function and then cosine. But before you do it, make sure, click on the little wrench thing and make sure you are in degrees.
Where's my wrench?
It's on the top right.
Oh, I see.
It's like a little wrench.
Right
Make
above
sure you're in
the
degrees.
I'm not even in degrees.
0.64.
There you go. So I'm going to go cosine of 50 and we get 0.64.
Are you trying to do that now?
So I get 0.64 equals x over 5. Okay. I got to go through, I still got to solve it for x by doing the opposite, which is times 5. So I'm going to get 0.64 times 5, which, let me go back here to Desmos,
Whack, whack.
0.64, no, that's 0.65.
0.64
times 5,
3.2.
3.2. I get x equals,
You get 3.2 equals x.
doesn't matter either way.
No, it matters.
It really doesn't.
It really
Okay.
does, Cookie.
So we found x, we're also going to find y.
Ow,
So
what
let's go through and let's look at y. So y is an opposite, right?
happened?
And which other side should we use? Which other side has a number now?
Adjacent.
Well, they both have numbers, right? So pick one. So if this one is 3.2, really, right here.
Oh yeah, huh?
So I want to find the opposite, and then I just need to pick a side to use because they both have numbers now. It doesn't matter which you use. I like to use the one without decimals, though. So I'm going to use my hypotenuse.
So sine.
So I have an opposite and hypotenuse. Which one of the 3 uses opposite and hypotenuse?
Sine.
Sine. So I'm going to go sine of 50, and it's going to equal opposite, which is y, over hypotenuse, which is 5. And it's going to work basically the same way, except this time I got to plug in sine of 50. Function sine 50, 0.76.
Times 5 is 3.8.
0.76 equals y over 5. And we gotta multiply by 5 on both sides. And we get, what'd you get from it?
3.8. Are you sure?
No, I'm not, Alyssa.
This
Positive.
This time. You get 3.8.
What is it without 0.7?
I don't like when triangles do that. They got like a whole number and then they got like decimals and stuff. It's like,
You will almost always get decimals today.
Boo.
Almost
Whack.
always. You might have a nice number, but it's not gonna happen often. Alright, so we found y. Your guys' turn.
I'll write it down.
So let's have you on this triangle over here on the right. So let me kind of separate this a little bit.
I think the first line going down was your best line yet. I'll figure it out with you.
So good.
Alright,
Noah.
so on this other triangle, let's have you guys solve for x first. Solve for x first. So on your own, solve for x using your trig functions.
Wait, Volky, I got a question. With the thing we have here, that,
Opposite and adjacent depending on where you start. So opposite, you gotta go to the opposite side of the triangle, right? Which means opposite is going to be. Hypotenuse is always the same, but your opposite and adjacent depending on where you start.
Where do we start?
You're starting at the 40. That's where your angle is.
Okay.
Oh.
do you want us to go and do y if we're done with this?
Let's actually do y together, just so I can remind you of something.
Can you use the bathroom?
Sure. We'll give you another minute, then we'll go over it. Okay, so let's go through and get started on this one, but before we do anything, we should label our sides. Raven, what's my hypotenuse?
Why?
Yep. And what's my opposite? So we got to be careful. If I'm starting here at 40, right? Opposite goes all the way to the opposite side of the triangle. So it's actually going to be x. This is actually going to be my opposite. And that means 6 is my adjacent. So be careful. Opposite and adjacent depend on where you start. So on this one, like on my first one I did, the 50 was over here on the left, and my opposite, I went all the way to the opposite side, and I got to the y. Okay. So if we are going to solve it for x, Carissa, which of the three things should we use? Sine, cosine, or tangent?
Or which letter?
If we're solving it for x, right here. Yep. Tangent, because x is an opposite, and I've got a number at my adjacent. The one that uses opposite and adjacent is tangent. So tan of 40 is going to equal opposite, which is x, over adjacent, which is 6. Like that. And we can go through and solve it. Kayla, what'd you get for tan of 40?
0.83.
Okay. 0.8. Actually, let's round it to 0.84 since it's 0.839. Okay, and what do I get to next, Austin?
Times 6.
Yep. And we get 5.04.
So is it okay if I just have 5.04 .034.
Yeah, it means you rounded it differently, but you got to be careful because a lot of times in Smarter Balance they'll tell you how many decimals to round to. So like on this one, if it said round to the second decimal and you did 0.83, you would be wrong because if you're rounding it, it should be 0.84. 0.839 rounds to 0.84. So be careful. Okay. And so that was X. We got 5.04. All right, let's find our Y together on this, just because it's a little different. So if I'm going to find Y, it is a hypotenuse. Alyssa, what other side do you want to use to go with that hypotenuse? Okay, so that's the adjacent, right? So what uses adjacent and hypotenuse? Yep. So we're going to set up a cosine. I'm going to go cosine of 40 equals adjacent, which is 6, over hypotenuse, which is y. What should I do next to solve for this?
Wouldn't you actually plug in cosine minus 40?
Okay, we could do that. We could do that first, that's fine. So cosine of 40 is 0.77.
Like flip it.
What are we going to do, Austin?
You change 0.77 with y.
Yep. So on this, my variable y is on the bottom, right? So we got to be careful because a lot of people are like, oh, just divide it by 6 and you get your answer. Well, we can't quite do that. Since a y is on the bottom, what I have to do is, and I think I'm actually going to show you a different way than what you said, Austin, but what you said. Okay. So since y is on the bottom, I can't just divide it by 6. So what I'm going to do is I am going to make it into a proportion. If I have 0.77 and then I go over 1, that's still 0.77, right? But it's a fraction. If I have a fraction that equals a fraction, how would I solve for that y?
Don't you cross multiply?
We could cross multiply, or what's the other one that I like to do? Because it's fun to say and Josh. Fish method. Or you can do the fish method. So I like doing the fish method, or you can cross multiply. It does not matter either way. And only do this whenever you have the y or the x or whatever on the bottom part of your fraction.
Wait, so why is the y on the bottom there?
Because
it's a over h,
cosine is a over h, right?
not h
6
over
over y. So it's on the bottom because it's the hypotenuse, and cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse.
Or you can just flip it. and make it.
Or you can flip and just divide, but you're basically doing the same thing. So I like doing the fish though because it's easy. So 6 times 1 divided by 0.77. And plug that straight into Desmos. And we get 7.79 equals y.
7.79.
Yep.
I'm surprised I remember that.
Good stuff, man. Good stuff.
What did you say?
That's not a fish. It's like one of those giant old bicycles.
It's a fish with a fun tail. You got a fun little tail.
Don't judge his fish just because he's not drawing.
I'm a math teacher, not an art
What is it
teacher.
equal again?
It's abstract.
7.79.
It's
7.79.
abstract.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Phil, it's like the
Hey,
infinity.
go keep. You go close up for me.
It's a fish with a little bloody old tail.
Yeah, it's like a. You ever seen like the fish that have like a
It's like
like
the,
an angel fish that have like a little circle thing on the tail?
it's like
Yeah.
this. The pointy thing.
Yeah.
Wait,
Oh,
You've never seen
Yeah, it's like
Stop
a little
fishing like
circle
that?
fish actually. Not a clownfish.
Fish
Yes.
Osprey.
Yeah, it's
Cut
colored.
off fish, reminds me of Nemo, shark bait.
Oh.
Whatever
Yeah,
it
at least one
goes.
more. All right. So far we found missing sides.
Oh, no, you eat
What we
fish.
can also do is find missing angles.
Wait, do we still label
Do
it?
we have like an assignment?
Yeah, we do.
Dude,
Okay.
you're gonna try to like make me cry before I leave, huh?
Remind me.
We're trying to make the
That's
last
my goal in
16
life.
days of
You
your
don't
high
cry,
school
it's just-
career
Just make it.
miserable.
Last 16 days of my high school
Alright.
Okay,
I hope.
so let's go get this, we can be done soon.
I'm gonna make sure you're super super.
Yella, shut up, we
Yes.
could be done soon.
Okay. Okay. So, on this one, I'm gonna find x and y. And I'm still gonna use sine, cosine, and tangent. But this time around, it's gonna look a little different. So let's start with x. So I'm gonna find x, but the way I start this is gonna be just like the other ones. I should label everything. So I have my hypotenuse here, right? And then I have my opposite and then adjacent, right? Okay. So on this, in order to find x, I'm gonna set up a trig function.
Why'd you circle X?
Okay, when you have x and y like that, will x always be? Will O always go like where the 7 is?
Oh.
If
X and
But
y.
x
that's
is
where
in
we
the bottom
start
corner, yes.
Okay.
But if it's in the top corner,
And it's where
then
we
it's
start?
a zero.
Okay, but that's how it's always gonna be if there's 2 x and y that like that.
Well, no, sometimes they might put x up here.
Are you saying something about that card?
Yeah, then I put x right there in that spot, and y right there in that spot.
Yeah.
So
Yes, it'll always be like this.
okay, it will be the same way if y is on like where like the corner is right there.
Yeah. Okay. So, in order to find x, what I need to do is set up a trig function. And I'm going to use sine, just because it's the first one.
You already decided it?
What do you
God,
mean?
didn't even
Melissa?
ask us.
Fine.
Okay, so I'm going to set up the problem with sine. So,
Are you
I'm going to go sine of, I don't know what x is though, right? So I'm going to go x.
Whoa.
And it's going to equal my opposite, which is 7, over my hypotenuse, which is 12.
Can you type
Okay.
inside X?
So, we got to be careful. So, to start with let's just go 7 divided by 12. I can just plug into decimals, right?
Seven.
Let's plug that into decimals real quick.
It's gonna be
You're
0.58.
like, okay, do math.
0.58, yeah.
What did I just say?
So I get sine of x
I got a photon
equals 0.58. Alright, I gotta get rid of this sign by the x. So to do that, I'm gonna
We're
use
gonna type it.
the inverse, or sometimes called the arc sine. So we're gonna do sine -1, which is sine inverse,
Oh, I hate these.
cosine inverse, or tan inverse. That is the opposite of a sine. Like divide is the opposite of
Wait, give
multiply,
us a
right?
second to write this
I
down
know.
real quick.
You made this 2 lessons last year.
Uh-huh.
One.
Well, you guys are juniors now. We got smarter balance in like 3 days, so
3 days.
Thanks, Goki.
after Thursday.
3
I
days from
can't
now
be
is
doing
Thursday.
After 3 days of school.
Okay.
Wait, we start on Thursday?
It's only my 3rd period for this
I
whole
thought you
day.
said I'm a she.
So, tell me some
Skipper.
stuff.
Alright, anyway. Okay. So, in order to get rid of this sign, I don't divide it or anything. What I do is I do the arc sign, or the inverse sign. It means the
So
same
you
thing.
do sin,
Oh, wait.
sine.
So, I'm going to go sine inverse.
Inverse.
And if I do it on the left, I have to do it on the right. So I'm going to go sine inverse. And what happens is the sine and sine inverse cancel each other out, and I just have an x. And it's going to equal
Wait, why are you dividing it by
sine
sine
inverse
inverse?
of 0.58. I'm
I'm
not
trying to get rid
dividing,
of the
I'm just
sin
doing a
equal-
sine inverse on both sides.
My feet are
Because what it
squished.
does is it gets rid of they cancel out. Sine and sine inverse cancel out, and they're gone. But on the right side, it's 0.58, right? So I'm going to do sine inverse of 0.58. And this, I can plug straight into Desmos. And to get to it though, let's see. So I got to go over here to my,
Ah.
I got to go over here to functions, and then it's the sine -1.
Wait, can't you just do like SI?
Nope, I can't. I
The
can't.
inverse poles
I
You
just
can try it.
can't.
I don't know.
make it
I
one.
never actually type it at the end because I'm always using it on the board.
gonna fall off. My feet.
Alright, so sine inverse of 0.58
Oh,
is
wait, come back.
35.45. So x equals 35.45.
Oops, these socks have holes in the bottom.
Yep.
I was gonna put that on.
Alright, and that should be degrees because it's an angle. Alright, we still gotta find y, right?
Okay,
What
why
should
are
I
my
do to find y?
shoelaces blue?
Ooh, can't you just do like? No,
That's
never
my
mind.
no name.
Oh wait, you can do 35.45 plus 90. So you know that one right there is a 90-degree angle,
Mhm.
and then subtract it by 360.
Your shoes so
You're
tight.
close though.
Yeah, I know.
Alright,
180. 180.
So, I found x, and I got x is 35.45, right?
Nope.
I need to find y. But I don't need to go through and do a sine inverse or cosine inverse or anything like that in order to find it.
Does it say minus or, oh no, that says 0.58.
So I don't need to go through and do any fancy sine, cosine, or tangent to find it. I just need to look at triangles. How many degrees are in a triangle?
180.
Oh, 180.
180, right? Which means, if I add in all three sides together, it's got to equal 180. Or if I'm going to work backwards, I can take 180 and I can subtract stuff from it. So, minus 35.45. What does this little red box mean right here? 90. So 180 minus 35.45 minus 90, whatever that is going to equal y. And plug it straight into Desmos.
Hey Siri.
What do you think? Can I try that actually, Goldie?
54.55.
I know, I didn't choose
So
it.
y equals 54.
Hey, you had to say minus 90.
Wait.
I already did that
wait.
part. I
Wait,
did
you
180
did put
minus 90
weights.
got 90.
So
Both of us.
you did.
Whoa. Shook.
That's the long way.
It's for real.
I did.
You did the long way.
And literally minus on his face would have like,
Cause I write out my stuff.
whoa.
Cause I can do it
54.5.
right. I'm not lazy like that. Even though I hate math.
Degrees.
Okay.
Four.
Is it still
The
degrees?
sun.
Yes, still degrees. That's what I
So
did.
put the little degree thing in there?
Alright. You guys gonna do another one together or you want to try it on your own?
Together, 'cause I'm so
We need
confused.
one more
No.
together.
Yeah.
There's 4 up here.
Okay, so let's find y this
It's
time.
on the next page.
Let's find y.
So why is this?
Okay, so on this one, I need to go through and label things. So if I have my hypotenuse is my longest, right? Maya, what's my opposite?
Your opposite's
The
3.
4.
Because I'm finding y.
Oh. Hey. Never mind.
Alright, that means my adjacent is 3.
If you weren't so prepared, Kiala.
Shut up.
Alright, Raven, which one of the three things do you want to use to find this? Sine, cosine, or tangent? Okay, so if I'm going to do sine of y, what's it going to equal, Raven?
Not
4 over?
5.
Yep.
I don't have holes in them.
So sine of y equals 4 over 5. So then I just got to keep going.
Listen to what I say.
Sine of y, let's see, 4 over 5, you can plug into Desmos, or it's 0.8.
Is I have a hole in mine.
And Carissa, how am I going to get rid of the sine?
The inverse.
Yep. So I'm going to go sine inverse, sine inverse. And I'm going to get y equals sine inverse of 0.8, which I'm going to plug into Desmos. I don't have that memorized.
Why not?
Why would you have them?
Why?
Sine inverse of
Well, you
0.8.
don't have it yet memorized yet, Goldie.
53.13.
53.13.
There's a lot of tiny things.
Where the heck is
You should know everything about math.
Alright, then I got to go degrees.
53.3?
1,
0.13 to the 0 power.
Yeah.
You good, Goldie?
Higher.
He's up.
I'm not used to having this class.
Alright.
That's what you look like when you talk.
And then last thing, we got to find x. Selena, we got to find x.
I was
What is
stretching.
your-
minus 50.
He's a
I
whoa.
was stretching.
Alright, and then to find x, I'm going to go 180. See my pen changes. 180
Awful.
minus 90 minus 53.13. And that's going to equal my x.
37.87. 36.87 is what I meant.
What was it? 36.6?
Yeah. 87.
87 degrees.
36.
Alright.
Are we gonna get docked down on this if we do not put that little degree thing there?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll find you.
How do we?
Yeah, it's just a little circle. It's that tiny little circle. You don't even need to do that much. Why are you complaining?
Why you
It's a
gotta be
lot.
shapesis?
You
That's a lot.
graduate this year.
Alright.
Graduate this year.
Your guys' turn. I want you guys to just do the first one. Don't do the second.
No,
five
dude,
is
the
three.
second one.
Just do the first one.
Why? The second one was more fun.
It's like the first ones we
3
did.
Exactly.
hours till
Oh, so you're gonna do
Christmas.
What?
I wish. Dude, your face when you said
That means we'd be halfway through senior year.
do.
I would be happy.
Really good
What?
for that.
That means meet me halfway through some unit.
Alright, find X and Y in this next one. And then after that, we're
I
done.
got a question.
Yes.
Okay, so what if someone does a Y as their beginning, as like their first angle, as their actual angle?
Yeah.
Can you like speak
If
English?
someone else has the X as the angle, would they still get the same answers?
Yes.
Are you sure?
It might. They might be slightly off because you rounded differently, but that's it.
Chicken.
You will still get the same answers.
I feel like they're lying.
Austin, do you have
Triangles are not that
Facebook or
sneaky.
Instagram?
Can
Yeah.
someone like
Yeah.
do?
Have you seen that video of that
Why
little kid
is
where he
there
eats a
egg?
piece of chicken and he's like,
Oh god, yeah.
chicken! You see that, right?
Yes.
You know what I'm not
Even-
seeing? You work.
Even Austin has seen it. How have you not? Hushkar, I know.
I've never
that
seen
you-
it, so
Gogi,
It's
of course
just
you have.
something.
I'm okay with that. Sounds like a vine though.
You've seen the yodeling kid though, right?
I just want to be
Lord,
sure.
I don't know what I'll do. Yes, isn't that little kid?
And they're comparing the Halo kid to the yodeling kid.
That's what you reminded me of this.
Is this anybody's drink up here?
Yeah. It's Casper's.
What's in
No
it?
way.
I'll drink it.
After the freshmen have had it? I don't think I should let you.
You probably could.
Dude, I found there was a bag of McDonald's sitting right here yesterday. There was like chicken in it, and I ate it.
That was probably Magi's.
Ew,
It was
hell
still wrapped and
no.
everything. No one touched it. It was just sitting at the bottom of the bag.
You let her eat
all
it?
by itself. Why wouldn't
Terrence
she?
feels not to know better. If she hasn't learned at this point, there's nothing I can do to change it.
She's wiping her eye with a sock.
It's not a sock. It's a tissue. My eyes watering.
I know, I'm just kidding.
I'll give you another minute, then we're going over it, and then we'll probably skip the exit tape.
I already forgot, so wait.
Opposite.
I was looking and then I got interrupted.
What is the H?
I was drawing cartoons through all that, so.
Are we doing Y or X?
Doesn't matter, you gotta find them both. Pick one.
Opposite hypotenuse.
Chill.
So good.
You're psycho, don't you are? Oh my god.
Just simple addition. Well, I think we have less on a simple addition.
First,
I think what?
you gotta list
On like a simple addition.
A lesson? Unreal.
We have long
Okay,
division.
maybe Kiara needs a lesson on that, but I think I'm good.
I think you need to know.
She's done.
Oh, now a lot.
Why is she worrying about smart balance?
Did you fail or something?
Come on.
Probably.
Gogi, did you have the oaks?
I just forgot.
I don't think they do any oaks anymore. I think it got replaced by spreader ballots.
That reminds me of freaking Beetlejuice.
So the
Dude, they got little kids.
The
Middle
Oaks
schoolers.
test is gone,
And the kids
but
are
it's
cute.
still, we use the Oaks program. Alright, listen, start us off. What are we gonna do?
You did a little line thingy by the X and the O for the H for the A.
Oh my god.
Wait, can I write it?
It's kind of sad that I understood that.
Wait, draw the line. I want to draw the line. My shoes aren't even. Ew, Goki. My hair.
Hurry up.
Shut up.
No.
You draw the line.
That's it.
Yes.
Alright, keep going. What's next?
I don't know. That's as far as I got.
Alright, well, which one are you gonna solve for? X, I assume, right?
I mean, I guess.
Alright, so what are you gonna use to solve for it? Sine, cosine, or tangent?
Cosine.
Alright, so cosine of x is, what's it gonna equal?
Wait, can we use sign on both?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
You can use whatever you want on both.
Hard.
Will it be different though? Someone else uses like tan, cosine.
No.
Why did you
Not as long as you set it up right. Alright, what's cosine gonna equal?
Which one is? It has. Which one is that one? Huh?
Okay, so write it down.
8 over 5 or 5 over 8?
5 over 8. So cut.
Oh, duh.
AH.
That's what I was thinking of in my head.
And then we gotta go through and start solving, right? So
Oh, we
5
gotta do.
over 8
Oh yeah, what is that?
is only.
Use your brain, not the calculator.
You do it in your head then.
It is 0.99.
Nah. 0.65. So cosine x
She was
equals
pretty close.
0.65.
She was pretty close.
Equals
Look at that. I was pretty close.
2, 5. Eek,
Okay.
what happened to my handwriting?
What do I gotta do next, Alyssa?
We're gonna have the cosine, and then we're gonna do the cosine inverse.
Yep.
Huh?
Yep.
Oh.
And we get x equals.
Wait,
Threes.
do I just put that,
Yeah,
huh?
that's fine. X is gonna equal 51.32 degrees.
Have you already figured out what I'm doing?
You got a different one using
I
sign?
wouldn't use this, right? I
Didn't
wouldn't
sign,
use
you'd
it.
have to do
Look at my
right?
three.
I think
Look
it's
at
all
me.
now. I wouldn't
That's no for
do
what?
it like this.
Good work.
Wait.
Where you at?
Okay, I'm
Like,
sure
I
you
wouldn't do
And then we gotta do y too, right?
Right. Yep, find your
like I
y.
wouldn't do sine or cosine.
You sure you're in
this
Herbert.
way. I'd just go and solve it.
What is 90 minus 51.32?
So,
Hey, why'd you take the calculator?
okay.
Alrighty, let us go to Desmos.
Do that one.
I got it.
Yeah, I was like, what?
Sine of x equals
38.68 degrees.
38.68?
Wait.
I don't
Oh,
know what.
3 over 8 is not.
I did it the long way. I did 90. Yeah,
What'd I do?
That's my
That's still
answer.
not what I got for y. Okay,
No?
Well, your y
Opposite.
should be different than mine.
hold on. No, it shouldn't. It's the same problem.
I don't know why it's wrong, but.
That's weird. Why is yours?
I don't know if you did it wrong. It's just not the same as mine.
Done by.
Eek. Oh.
That's weird. I don't know. I feel like that's one. Alright, find y.
I was doodling, so I don't know.
Alright, see your y's are good. Why is your x weird?
What's
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you got it right and I got it wrong.
How did I walk like this?
That's point.
That's for x though. I have to.
Are we doing the exercise yet?
No, we're gonna skip it. Alright, I don't know. I gotta look at that one. But because your y is right, your x is weird. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I got.
Okay, so that's it. So I do have some practice work for you. You don't have to do it all.